There was a story of a man who played the pipe organ. He spent his entire life playing the gigantic instrument until one day all was took away from him. An orchestra was introduced into his little town, and his hobby had been completely taken over by the more pluralistic and modern way of composing music. Bitterly sunk in the glorious memory, when he could play the pipe organ and inspire people, he became a recluse. By the time when he should enjoy the pleasure with his offspring, he, against the will of everybody, embarked on a journey to a distant kingdom in search for the unique musical notes which have resided in his head for so long. It was at his deathbed until he finally succeeded. It was at a foreign church where he was found dying. He was weeping out of regret and disappointment until a girl in white dress, ornamented with natural purity and vigor, appeared from behind the church door and sat in front of the pipe organ. As she started to play, the majestic, soothing sound filled the entire hall, filling the weary old man's ears. His nerves were woken up to a start, and he died in peace and delight. Now, this is not a story simply about how a man jumped out of his comfort zone and started an adventure. Instead, the distinct differences of conforming for a hobby and sticking to it is the core of the tale. These differences can occur in very familiar scenarios. Have you ever refrained during a self-introduction from telling everyone what your hobby is because it's not mainstream enough? Have you ever ceased to explain what your hobby really was when you found that blank bewilderment in people's eyes? For example, woodcrafting, paleontology, and maybe yodel singing. These are what I call a minority hobby. A minority hobby is enjoyed and appreciated by a minority group and has very little to do with mainstream culture. The common folks deem them unnecessary to exist because they don't see their value and are not interested in discovering their value. However, for some of us, we advocate these minority hobbies. The reason behind our support can be so simple, so elegant, and so irresistible that it became habits that stick for life. And we feel it our obligation to keep it running and pass on to a wider audience. The first thing to do when endeavoring to boost a minority hobby is to bear in mind the methods of doing so. In order for a minority hobby to stay alive, there are basically two ways. The first is to target a certain group, and the second is to merge it with mainstream culture. Now, the former is hard to accomplish because it requires a certain ground to be carried out, a certain format, a routine, say a club or regular conference. But the latter is more sensible because when we merge it with mainstream elements, the number of people who know it will be increased and thus will have a better effect. For example, there exists in China a series of Chinese classical instruments such as erhu, yangqin, etc. Since a certain time, they have been gradually forgotten under the impact of Western orchestra. The way for them to regain popularity is to remix them with electric sound with the composition of modern music. Now the music works of Xu Mengyuan have become the favorite background music of many video publishers. And in the light of biology, we know that a species die out if it does not take in new genes. In the sense of hobbies, birds of a feather flock together. Those minority hobby advocates should work together to generate newborn beings, new pieces of work over the original, because to mutate is the key to evolution, and evolution is the most important part in order for a hobby to remain vigorous. I started a public media account featuring movies and movie reviews. As much as people may say they like watching movies or going to the cinemas, there exists a certain void of how to appreciate them as a form of artistic expression. And after watching hundreds of movies, I mean, I watch at least 2 films a week. And not to the cinema, but at home, using the internet, and So our brains heated by the notion of writing Pulitzer-winning movie reviews and believing that we are chosen, destined to inspire, we began our journey of writing. However, at first, our articles did not receive many fans, and the number of fans is not swooping up, and did not receive many likes. And this is when we realize that we need to use more modern elements, a more sensational medium. We have to think globally and enter a more universal platform. Thus, we began to compose reviews of all genres of films, and latest ones, not only on masterpieces like Annie Hall or those of Billy Wilder, but also very recent ones like anime Weathering with You. Also, we started to use a globally accepted way of relating, filming short videos. In this era of information explosion, people are more prepared to accept audio-visual information than plain words. And after all is done, and we see a steady rise of fans, did we move on to the content of our reviews? This is when your love for a hobby elevates to a whole new level, wholehearted academia. This is the most time-consuming but important part of boosting a minority hobby. Because we found that writing about movies does not only concern analyzing the story the film carries, because then it will be not indifferent from analyzing literature. It's about the whole line, the whole production line of a film, from the formation of inspirations, then to the prop setting, and finally the whole structure of the film. Without professional knowledge, this analysis cannot be done. For example, unlike The Hateful Eight by Quentin Tarantino, which has obvious lighting and a prop setting, Citizen Kane has a lot of gimmicks in it, not visible to the eye of common audience. And in these times, we have to read articles, watch old reviews, do research before observing these little tricks. However, this part, the second part, academia, turns out to be pretty fun. Because the more you know, the stronger the urge you feel to push you to learn more knowledge. Because every piece of information opens up a whole new line of discussion. Because they link you with the history of that hobby, and very likely the famous ones in that history. In the case of movies, we know renowned directors, screenwriters, and the tons of adaptation films. Once you have read the original novel, your understanding of the film will totally deepen. Even though your work, this academia process, does not pay in a utilitarian way like the paychecks at your company or the scores at school, we still endeavor to know more, because this is our life, our pleasure, besides earning the bread. The final process of boosting minority hobby is to interact with like-minded people. Famous social media platforms, which are so good at recommending interest groups, are the best places for you to interact with your flock. And for example, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter are all solid choices. I have a pen friend who has been keeping track with me for over 6 years talking about movies. In these circles, and one day, you must hold the belief that you will become an authority. But beware, do not enter a circle until you are satisfied with your own knowledge level. Communicating on an average ground of knowledge is the best way, because in that way, when you hold out an open mind and a welcoming heart, people will never say no to your works and efforts. Boosting a minority hobby is never easy, and quite often as hard as building a skyscraper from scratch. But please feel lucky for yourself, because you and I, we all have this unique hobby, this interest that can keep us awake at night, make us smile, and inject our muscles with a stimulus not available elsewhere. We are able to do something we like, that, no offense, many people cannot find for all their life. And besides, isn't it romantic to just think that the most beautiful thing can be enjoyed by a small circle of friends? Be it minor or unwelcome, it is a privilege, but not a burden. Think globally, act locally. Start by influencing your friends. Make small gatherings. A very good example is that through my school's association, I have been able to influencing a small group of people. And when they're watching movies, they are now accustomed to analyzing its shots and takes, its advantages and shortcomings. And I pride myself on some of that because it's, my pride and my proud. My works have paid off. Another example is Chris Stuckman, who is a very famous, popular YouTuber who talks about movies, and some of you audience might recognize his name. He makes a short video talking about movies for 5 minutes in the background of his study with film props in the back, and make a rating. Very short, so simple and so easy, and he was able to do it for years. And now he has over 1 million followers. I mean, wow. Imagine that. But all in all, it still comes to quality. Please, enrich yourself before you make a move. Stick to your hobby, never let go. This is the way. Thank you.